Hello, everyone. This is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. This is the Gnostic Genesis. Before we get into it, just want to mention a few things. First up, Patreon. If you'd like to support the work here of Astral Club, you can certainly do so on Patreon. When you join, you get the chat function. We can talk with everyone else, the direct mail to me with suggestions and comments, advanced podcasts on Sunday, and if you're interested, there will be a link to Patreon in the description. Next up, astral projection lessons. If you'd like a lesson to learn how to astral project, be glad to work with you. We've worked with folks now all over the world. If that sounds interesting, just go to the description. There's an email there where you can ask for more information. And lastly, the thanks button. Hey, if you like the episode, you want to throw a couple of bucks Astral Club's way, a thanks button is a good way to do it. Okay, let's get into it. The Gnostic Genesis. I have a great affinity to Gnosticism. Gnosticism was labeled a heresy many hundreds of years ago by Orthodox Christianity. They tried to stamp it out completely, and they pretty much did a pretty good job doing it. Much of the information we have about the belief in Gnosticism, or, wisdom knowledge, is through the writings of some of their greatest critics. I'm going to tell you a story here, and it's a creation myth, if you will, from the Gnostic perspective. I hope you find it as interesting as I did. Okay, the Gnostic Genesis. Here is the full Gnostic Genesis narrative, written as a mythic story, weaving the classic themes of the preexistent God, or the invisible spirit, Sophia, Achamoth, the demiurge, or Yaldabaoth, and the creation of humanity. It keeps fidelity to the core motifs of Valentinian and Sethian Gnostic cosmology, while presenting it in a flowing narrative. You can read up on Valentinian and Sethian Gnostic cosmology and the differences between them, but for the purposes of this myth or story, I'm not going to get into it. Okay, the Gnostic Genesis is a mythic story of the pleroma. For pleroma, think of the universe, everything that is. Sophia, Achamoth, the demiurge, and the birth of humanity. First up, before all worlds, there was the pre-existent God. Before time, before form, before the first whisper of becoming, there was only the pre-existent God. Also called, as I said, the invisible spirit, the depth, or mythos. This being was not a person, not a force, not even a being as mortals understand it. It was infinite awareness, pure stillness, self-contained, lacking nothing. Nothing could be said of it except that it was, and from it emanated silence, the gentle womb from which all further emanations would unfold. In the stillness of silence, the invisible spirit contemplated itself. And from this contemplation emerged the pleroma, a realm of perfect light, inhabited by emanations or eons, each a facet of the divine mind. Next up, the eons and the desire of Sophia. Within the pleroma, there arose many eons in harmonious pairs: mind and truth, word and life, man and church, each unfolding the fullness of the divine. But the youngest of these eons was Sophia, wisdom. And Sophia possessed an audacity that the other eons did not. She longed to know the origin, the unreachable source, directly. Not content to emanate only with her paired counterpart, she sought to create from herself alone, to grasp the mystery of mythos without mediation. Her desire birthed an unbalanced emanation, a creation undertaken without the harmony of her companion twin. Sophia's act shook the stillness of the Pleroma. The birth of deficiency, or Achamoth. What Sophia produced was not a full eon, but a half-formed being, a chaotic, trembling, luminous shadow. This being, her unbalanced offspring, was cast outside the Pleroma into the region of the limit, the boundary between perfection and the unformed void. The offspring known as Achamoth, or Sophia after the fall, the wisdom who had descended into shadow. Separated from the Pleroma, Achamoth felt loneliness, longing, ignorance, fear, yearning for her lost mother, who she couldn't see because of where she was. These emotions crystallized into the elements of the lower worlds. Achamoth's tears became matter. Her fear thickened into darkness. Her hope produced a faint light. Her yearning generated the seeds of soul. She was luminous and broken, an exile generating creation through her emotional turmoil. Now we go on to the demiurge, or the child of Sophia's shadow. In her anguish, and imagine the anguish of this half-formed being who finds herself alone in this darkness, feeling all these awful, emotions, and just trying to reach for something out there. So of course she was in anguish. She emitted yet another being. She created a ruler, ignorant of the worlds above, born of her distress, but infused with stolen sparks of divine potential. This being looked upon himself and saw only power. He declared, "I am God, and there is no other beside me." This, of course, is the God of the Old Testament, the one who is, "I am a jealous God." Really? Would an almighty being, creator of a universe and all-knowing, really know what jealousy is? It would seem to me that it would require a being that was much more limited, who would find himself jealous or angry, or constantly harping about, "I'm the only God, trust me on that one." It always rankled when I read that in the Old Testament. I was just thinking to myself, I wouldn't want to work for this guy. I wouldn't want to go to school and have him as a teacher. So how is this the whole creator of the universe? How is this the pinnacle of creation when it's obviously flawed? It never made a lot of sense to me. But if you put it in this myth, and he is the offspring of this poor, abandoned Achamoth, and keep in mind that as much as she was in shadow, he was in shadow too. He literally could see nothing else. He was shut away from the realm of light, the Pleroma. So, in this darkness, I guess he decided he had to compensate for something. And, he figured, well, I'm it. I'm the only God there is, so... I better be telling people about that. It's actually sad when you think about it. Anyway, let's go on. He had never seen the Pleroma, never heard the voice of the invisible spirit, never witnessed the eons. Thus, he mistook his solitude for supremacy. The demiurge, also called Yaldabaoth, Sackless, Samael, the blind god, was radiant with stolen sparks from Achamoth, but clouded by ignorance. From these sparks, he fashioned lesser rulers. This keeps on going downhill. It's like making a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. You just keep on going downhill. So he creates some lesser rulers himself, who we call the archons. And together they built the material cosmos, patterned after dim impressions of the higher worlds, like shadows cast by the light Achamoth faintly remembered. Matter, therefore, was not evil, only incomplete, a dream copy of a forgotten home. Now we go on to the creation of man. The demiurge, seeking to demonstrate his creative power, shaped the first human being out of clay. He fashioned a body of admirable form, yet it lay lifeless. Achamoth watched from outside the cosmic veil, so she was able to see what was going on for him. She had placed divine sparks, fragments of Sophia, her mother's true light, within the very fabric of matter, and she longed for a being capable of receiving them. When the demiurge bent over the lifeless forms of his creation, the human, something remarkable occurred. He breathed into it the life he believed originated from himself, but the breath carried the hidden spark that had flowed through him unknowingly from Achamoth and ultimately Sophia. The human rose, animated not by the demiurge's power, but by a stolen spark of the pleroma. The demiurge marveled and feared. The archons trembled. For this creature, Adam, possessed something they did not, the light of the true God. Envious, the archons sought to blind humanity in ignorance. They cloaked the human mind in forgetfulness. They surrounded it with pleasure and pain and imprisoned the spark within a labyrinth of matter. They created Eve, hoping division would weaken the original human. But Achamoth, working through the serpent, whispered, "Awaken, remember what you are." And humanity tasted knowledge. Now think about that reworking of our more familiar Genesis tale of this God created Adam and then created Eve from the rib of Adam, and then set them in this glorious, wonderful garden, and giving them instructions to, do whatever you want, just don't eat from that tree over there. But keeping them naked, keeping them ignorant. And that's something that your traditional Christianity just doesn't address. They will, for many, many years, Eve was shown as the evil one, that she tempted Adam into eating from this apple. But what did the apple give? It gave knowledge. Why would some great creator half create a being and then keep it like a toy, ignorant? I mean, think about that. What kind of God would do that? I mean, let's just look at humans. We're certainly not gods, at least not yet. And, imagine a good father and a good mother having a child and wanting it to stay reliant on them, keeping it ignorant of the world. We would say those were bad parents, but in essence, that's what this God was doing. That was his intention. Let's keep them as my little playthings, and they'll worship me and sacrifice to me and just puff me up, get my ego growing into some enormous God-sized thing. That never made a lot of sense to me, because I always came up with other interpretations of this story, and they usually didn't match and annoyed my Sunday school teacher. I can tell you that. She'd see me arriving on Sunday, and she'd always make a face like, "Oh God, not this guy," because all the other kids would just gobble down whatever they were told. I was the one asking questions, saying, "Excuse me, how could this work? And how'd you get all the animals in the world on that big old boat?" And yeah, she probably still had nightmares about me. Anyway, let's continue. So anyway, after Achamoth working through the serpent, and she whispered, "Remember her, awaken, remember who you are," humanity tasted knowledge finally. Okay, now let's go on to the rescue of the light. The eons and the pleroma, seeing that Sophia's error had birthed a world filled with trapped sparks, acted in compassion. Christ and the eon, known as the Savior, extended themselves into the lower realms, not descending physically, but radiating gnosis, the knowledge that liberates. Christ, the eon, projects a saving vibration into the lower worlds, not to start a religion, but to liberate the light inside every human being. In this version of Gnosticism, there is, I said, another one, but in this one, Christ wasn't really material. They thought of him as really a spirit that came down to the lower worlds and spoke and tried to convey the wisdom of Gnosticism and to educate these poor, deceived humans who were worshiping this false god, this Yaldabaoth, this demiurge, trying to clue them in on the preexistent entity, the preexistent God, the one that is far beyond this limited being that has walked around and lorded itself over us, since the beginning. So in Gnosticism, Jesus is seen as a divine revealer of secret knowledge, or gnosis, needed for spiritual liberation from the flawed material world, rather than primarily a historical savior who died for sins, which, by the way, I never liked and I never really truly understood. How can someone else die for the sins of another? It makes no sense. Why would any kind of great God require some sort of a bloody sacrifice to make up for this, original sin that the humans were foisted on because they didn't want to be toys of this limited God? Every time I had to find myself in church when they were yakking about, oh, he died for this, he died for your sin, he died for this. And they're sitting there talking about how he died all the time, when what they should be talking about is what he had to say, the wisdom that he shared. That worshiping the death part of it is negating what his life was, the wisdom that he conveyed, how he wanted to raise humanity up to reveal what we truly were. God's in the making ourselves, and not these grubby, sinful, negative beings that this other God tries to get us trapped in, so that we're constantly feeling bad, constantly trying to excuse ourselves for yet another sin that we did, trying to keep us down, in other words. That was his true mission and his true gift to humanity. And certainly, Gnosticism looked at Jesus in that very particular light. Anyway, as I said, there are differing views on his nature. I don't want to get into those weeds. Some seeing him as purely spiritual, others as a man who attained enlightenment. Gnostics viewed his teaching as unlocking inner divinity, emphasizing spiritual awakening over bodily resurrection. Why would you want a bodily resurrection? That never made any sense to me either. And rejecting the Old Testament God, that old demiurge, that old Yahweh, contrasting sharply with Orthodox Christianity. I'm sure you understand now why Orthodox Christianity did their best to stamp out Gnosticism, because it was completely different from what they were trying to teach. See, they wanted power. And the best way to have power over someone is to make them think they need you for salvation. That without you, the priest, the archpriest, the bishop, the pope, whatever, that without that church and that whole bureaucracy, that your soul is lost. So they want you dependent on them. Whereas Gnosticism said, no, you've got this inner divinity. It's in you already. You have that spark from the original creation, from the pleroma. The only thing you need is the ability to gain wisdom, is the ability to open your mind and understand that you are truly divine, and that you don't need some false god. You don't need whole bureaucracies of people. You don't need gurus to rely upon and to tell you what you have to do. That you've got it all. All you have to do is just open your eyes, open your mind to the truth, and that is your true salvation. Don't be looking at your local priest or reverend or monk or anything else. You've got it. Anyway, key texts like the Gospel of Thomas portray Jesus as a guide to self-knowledge, revealing the kingdom of God is within. The Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of James are all Gnostic texts that we've recovered because they were buried in some jars, and they were dug up with a very famous Nag Hammadi, I believe, discovery. So you won't find them in your typical Bible because they were excised as heretical material. Okay, so what's the end of the story? Which, interestingly enough, is also the beginning. Humanity's purpose in this myth is not obedience to the demiurge, nor mastery of the material world, but the awakening of the spark. And think about that. Whenever you think about typical Orthodox Christianity, it's all about what? Obedience. Obey. Obey your parish priest. Obey the bishop and all of those other folks, right on up to the cardinals, right on up to the Pope. Don't think, obey. Obedience is what traps your soul. It's what traps you in this particular reincarnation cycle as well. When you pass from this world, there is a belief that you're going to be asked a series of questions. And I covered this in Buddhism. It's very interesting. But in the Gnostic beliefs, and you can look them up, you don't have to memorize the responses. The basic thing is this, is that you are a son or a daughter of the true preexistent God. You are a light, a spark of the original pleroma. That's your home. That's who you are. And that's important to remember and important to understand so that you'll be able to grow in wisdom and to break free from the reincarnation trap. Now, of course, there's folks, and I did it as well, who volunteer to come back to help others to break free, to get off the reincarnation cycle, the wheel. And that is as it should be. But let's go on here. Anyway, when the final spark remembers itself, the cosmos, woven of Achamoth's sorrow and the demiurge's ignorance, will dissolve like a dream at dawn. Then Achamoth will ascend, healed and restored, and Sophia will be made whole. The pleroma will welcome back all wandering light, and that's you and me. And the invisible spirit will shine in every being without veil or division. The Gnostic Genesis ends not with the perfection of the world, but with the liberation of the soul. If you like that, please hit the like button, share it with those of like mind, subscribe if you haven't already. Please, questions and comments. Do you enjoy learning about Gnosticism? As I said, it's a viewpoint that I find a lot of interesting truth in. I can't say that I'm necessarily a member of any particular belief system or church, but I try to grab what I consider wisdom from a variety of different beliefs. And certainly Gnosticism makes a lot more sense to me than some of the traditional Christianity that I was trained in as a boy. If, bottom line is, please like, share, subscribe, leave your questions and comments. As always, this is Rick, and I will see you on the astral plane.